I've met with the head of Ukrainian railways. The Ukrainian railways are being specifically targeted by Vladimir Putin. Rail workers are being killed.
Oh my God. No, no. You can't take every single political issue and say, well, Vladimir Putin was doing this. I cannot believe that he's literally comparing Mick Lynch and the rail unions to Vladimir Putin. This is a new low for a government minister being interviewed on the news to say,
we've got local elections fast approaching. Keir Starmer says you should be making gains. The Conservatives should be putting on seats. Oliver Dowden said last week that he expects you to lose 1,000 seats. So what is going on? You know, is the truth somewhere in the middle?
Well, look, we're obviously fighting very hard for every vote. But I think, look, if you look at the independent commentators, the independent experts in this case, all the very respected ones, they're forecasting, you know, it's not our forecast, they're forecasting that they think we might lose 1,000 seats. So, I mean, if people want to judge things, that's sort of what the independent experts are saying.
But are they saying that because...
We're going out campaigning for every vote.
Are they saying that because of...
I actually think they won't lose as many seats as they think that they are. I do think they will lose a lot of seats. Don't get me wrong. I think there's going to be plenty of seats that do get lost. But I think that local elections are the time in which people feel more likely to vote for candidates based upon the candidates that they are, rather than the national profile on a parliamentary scale, that is. I actually don't think they'll have as many losses as people expect them to have, but I do think there'll be significant losses at the very least.
Bad the situation is for your party. I mean, you last fought these seats in 2019 when Theresa May, as Keir Starmer says, apologised.
That's true. If they overestimate it, it means they can always make it look like it wasn't as bad as it otherwise would have been if they do that. Yeah, that makes sense, JDM.
Weeks later resigned, and that was the end of her. I mean, that's the baseline, and you're saying you're going to go backwards.
Well, no, we're not saying that. Look, we're not...
Well, you are saying that, aren't you?
We're not commentators. We're participants in this process. You know, we're going out, making our arguments very strongly. You know, we're going out, knocking on doors, fighting for every vote. All I'm saying is if you want to judge where their expectations are, if you look at what the independent experts are saying, they're suggesting they think we're going to lose 1,000 seats. Because it's tough at the moment. Look, we acknowledge it's tough on people. You know, there's a war going on in Europe. We're recovering from the pandemic. Inflation is high. That is putting people's finances under pressure. And so it's difficult at the moment. We've obviously got a very clear plan, and one of our clear range of the 5 priorities the Prime Minister set out is to halve inflation, to grow the economy and to cut debt. I think if we can deliver on that this year, things will look much more promising. But, you know, it is tough at the moment. I think it's very sensible to acknowledge that. But look, independent experts have made their forecast.
I mean, they say I just want to pick up on that, because they're not saying that that's definitely going to happen at 1,000 seats. It's just in the range of possibilities, right?
Well, that's their forecast. Look,
it's not their forecast, is it? They're saying that it could be as bad as this.
They're suggesting that that's what might happen. Look,
what might happen, not what will happen. So I think it is important to qualify that.
In the end, politicians are...
You can't just cherry-pick the worst-case scenario.
No. I'm just saying that seems to be where they're sort of saying is a sort of expectation. Politicians, though, I think sensible not to get into the forecasting game. We're about trying to persuade every single person listening to this programme that they should vote Conservative, because Conservative councils, as ever, deliver better services at lower cost than Labour and Liberal Democrats.
I mean, that's just literally factually untrue. No, they really... When has a Conservative council ever delivered better services? In what universe is that the case?
Nurses go on strike from 8 p.m. We're going to be speaking to Pat Cullen of the Royal College of Nurses shortly. What's your message to her?
Well, look, of the pay offer that was offered to NHS staff, we think was a fair and reasonable pay offer. Some of the largest unions in the NHS, their members have accepted that pay deal. And obviously the Health Secretary is going to wait formally until Tuesday, when the NHS Staff Council, which brings together all of those unions, formally reports back to him. But he stands ready to implement that offer, subject to hearing from them finally. So clearly a lot of members working a lot of workers in the NHS have accepted that fair and reasonable pay offer. And he'll have to decide after...
You see what I mean? He said, like, fair and reasonable. How many times have we heard the words fair and reasonable in response to the NHS pay offer? Again, it's just all memorised. It's all the same clips, the same buzzwords, the same rehearsed nonsense. And it is so fake. You just can't get any straight answers out of any of these politicians other than what they've rehearsed at home beforehand. Remember when this time last year, I think it was, when Boris Johnson was still Prime Minister, where Keir Starmer's rehearsed line was... the Tories have just come down from the moon. And he said it at like 5 different interviews in a row. It's so insincere.
Tuesday's meeting what the next steps are. But look, I'd say to Pat Cullen, look, she, I think, agreed that it was a fair and reasonable pay offer because she and her executive recommended it to their members. Their members obviously haven't accepted it.
And this is why it was so fucking stupid for people like Pat Cullen and whoever the negotiator was for Unison. It's so stupid that they both recommended to their membership to accept the pay deal. It's so dumb that they recommended to accept it because now they have no negotiating point. They can't negotiate it down. They've already completely lost out on the optics game because they can always pull this response and say, well, they recommended it to their members. Some of the members have accepted it. Now it's just the stinky old RCN members who are holding everything up and throwing their toys out of the pram, given that they went against their own union leader to reject the pay offer. It's, oh my God. Oh, why? Why?
Obviously, it's going to cause disruption in the NHS, so I would urge them to think again.
Yes, indeed. Hello, subject. Hello, fellow subject, Kevin. How you doing?
And to do what the other trade unions in the health service have done, which is to accept what I think is a fair and reasonable pay offer, reflecting the value that we do place on hard-working NHS staff.
The point, you say that they should accept it because others have, but the point is, I guess, the nurses who work for the RCN, or the majority of them, didn't think it was the right pay offer. And, you know, if you look at pay for nurses going back over the last decade, they have seen really difficult pay decisions made all the way back since 2010. The average pay of NHS nurses falling in real terms by 8% since 2010. And analysis from the London Economics saying that the nurses' pay declined at twice the rate of private sector pay. You can see why they feel that they should be given, you know, a decent pay rise.
Well, they should be given a decent pay rise, and I think that's what they were offered. If you look at
5%,
last year,
half of inflation.
If you look at last year, actually, when there was a public sector pay freeze, there specifically was a pay rise for nurses to reflect the value that the government places on them.
Yes, they still had a real terms pay cut, and they're still continuing to get real terms pay cuts. Right? The fact that you're saying we had a public sector pay freeze and nurses still aren't getting paid enough just shows how ruinous austerity was for the entirety of the period from 2010 to 2019. If you're saying, well, actually, you know, there was a public sector pay freeze for everybody else, we still gave nurses a pay rise, and they are still 16 points behind where the cost of living is now and where they previously were in 2008, that makes you look even more shit, Mark. That makes you look garbage.
And the pay deal that they were offered would have given a band 5 nurse, so that's an average nurse, over the 2 years of that pay deal, I think something in the order of a £5,000 pay rise. So the government believes it was a fair and reasonable pay rise. Some of the other staff
Number 4
groups, the GMB and Unison, have accepted the pay rise. So look, the Secretary of State will listen to what the NHS Staff Council says on Tuesday, but he stands ready, I know, to implement the pay deal that was offered if that's what the NHS Staff Council report back on Tuesday.
Unlike other strikes, originally there were no exemptions for emergency care, so things like cancer treatment, A&E, maternity. They have now, after some hospitals like Great Ormond Street raised the alarm, if you like, said that in some local areas they will provide cover. Are lives at risk over the next couple of days?
Well, I think the thing that's very difficult here is that because they haven't agreed any national exemptions, it makes it very difficult for those individual trusts and the individual trust managers to put in place arrangements to deal with those areas like A&E, like cancer treatment.
So what does that mean then? Are you worried about lives being put at risk?
It clearly does put patients at risk, which is why we urge the unions not to go ahead and do the strike. Clearly...
Yeah, I'm just sitting here going, like... Maybe, if you're going to criticise these things, maybe that was bad. Maybe that was a bad reshuffling of the NHS structure that you did. Maybe the Conservatives did a bad job managing the NHS. I mean, obviously that's no news to me and my wonderful chatters up here. We know that the Tories are always going to be garbage with the NHS. But the fact you're here saying, well, actually, there's a real issue that we have with regards to how the NHS works, when they made the changes that made this happen...
If NHS staff are not working, I mean, all of those trusts are going to work hard to put in place contingency arrangements. At local level, they'll all be working with NHS staff to look at the contingency arrangements and doing their best. But clearly there will be an impact if nurses don't come to work.
Give us an update on rail strikes as well, if you may.
Well, I think it's very damaging that the rail unions are calling strikes specifically targeting the Eurovision Song Contest. I've met with the head of Ukrainian railways. The Ukrainian railways are being specifically targeted by Vladimir Putin. Rail workers are being killed.
Oh my God. No, no, you can't do it you can't take every single political issue and say, well, Vladimir Putin was doing this. I cannot believe that he's literally comparing Mick Lynch and the rail unions to Vladimir Putin. This is a new low for a government minister being interviewed on the news to say, well, actually, I think you'll find that who's really similar to Vladimir Putin is Mick Lynch. Have you seen how little hair they've both got? Curious. That is genuinely ridiculous that they're trying to make this comparison. And also, again, as JDM points in chat, they fundamentally have to strike on the most impactful days for the public because they cannot make the case on a financial basis because the rail companies have been indemnified by the fucking government. Unreal.
In their hundreds. And I would have thought, frankly, rail workers would have wanted to stand in solidarity with them rather than target.
Oh my God. This is the worst. This is the worst. Well, I'm definitely turning this into a segment now.
Targeting the Eurovision Song Contest, which, if you remember, it's not our song contest. We're hosting it, but we're hosting it for Ukraine. And I think cynically targeting events that hard-working, working men and women across the country are spending their money on.
Mick Lynch is literally Vladimir Putin. Yeah, I cannot believe you're not showing solidarity with the Ukrainians by having your strike action not impact the Eurovision Song Contest. Oh my God. Oh dear Lord.
To try and attend, and targeting those, I think, is very cynical. There's been a fair...
Do you take a bit of responsibility for this as well, right? Because, you know, Rishi Sunak says that he is the great deal maker. That's how he's trying to portray himself as Prime Minister.
No pushback from Sophie Ridge. No saying, comparing Mick Lynch to Vladimir Putin. Do you maybe not think that's a little bit far-fetched here? No additional questioning coming from Sophie Ridge. It's like, oh yes, the union bosses are indeed like the megalomaniacal genocidal tyrant. Yes, very well put, Mr. Harper. Fucking hell. I know she went to private school, but Jesus Christ.
Minister. These strikes have been going on for absolutely months now. And look, if you kind of zoom out, we have a government that is effectively, the relationship between the government and the people who keep this country running has broken down. So, you know, the people who, you know, care for our sick in hospital, the people who teach our children, the people who drive the trains. Do you not take some responsibility for that as well?
Well, look, when I got this job, I thought it was good to reset the relationship. I met all the trade union leaders.
Well, it hasn't really worked, has it? I remember you saying that to us, and, you know...
It has, because if you look at a lot of the workers in the rail industry, so RMT workers who work for Network Rail, so that thousands of workers who work on the infrastructure, actually, they've had a fair and reasonable pay offer. RMT put it to their members, and the members
That's the 5th time he said fair and reasonable in this interview. But yeah, the fair and reasonable pay offer was the one that they rejected. They rejected the last and final offer, which was, I think, a 5% pay rise, which was 2% this year, 3% this year, went back on strike, and their National Rail were then forced to capitulate to give them a 14% pay rise. So the fair and reasonable pay offer they were originally given was the one that was rejected, and they had to continue taking strike action to be able to increase that from a crappy 5% to an excellent and deserved, quite frankly, 14% pay rise. And that's with the National Rail. That's with the public end of the rail delivery. Whereas actually the current strikes are not about National Rail, they're about Rail Delivery Group, which is a consortium of the private franchise runners of the railways. Right? So therefore, and those are the people who you have indemnified with government money, which is why they're being forced to strike on the most impactful public days, because they cannot make a financial impact on the actual train franchises themselves. You should know this, Mark. You're the Transport Secretary.
overwhelmingly accepted it. 90% turnout, 76% in favour. What's happening here is that the RMT executive isn't...
So if you think that it's correct for them to accept a 14% pay rise offer, which I agree, they absolutely were correct to accept it, but they were correct to reject the fair and reasonable 5% one that you're now saying was bad in comparison. The actually fair and reasonable was the 14% that was offered. Then why don't Rail Delivery Group offer them the 14% pay rise? Why is there not the 14% pay rise coming from Rail Delivery Group and Tim Shoveler, for example? Why isn't he giving that same pay offer to the remainder of the rail union striking and in a dispute with Rail Delivery Group? Isn't that a bit weird? Do you think that's a bit weird, Mark? Do you maybe think they'd be more likely to give an offer of 14% like National Rail if you hadn't indemnified them against any of their financial losses? Do you think it might have something to do with it, Mark?
Putting the third pay offer that they've had from the train operating companies, they're refusing to put it to their members. Now, my view is if they put it to their members, if you look at what they did on the Network Rail pay deal, I think their members would accept it. So my call to the union executive, this is not aimed at the hard-working men and women who work on the railway. Their executive should put...
Yeah, this isn't something I'm saying about the hard-working British tax-paying RMT members on the ground. I'm just talking about the people that they democratically elected to represent them at the top of the union. Like that, you are therefore by proxy also attacking the member base because they elected him and they almost certainly will elect him again.
What is a fair and reasonable pay offer? It's very similar to the Network Rail. Put it to their members, let them decide and not target the Eurovision Song Contest and the FA Cup final, hitting hard-working men and women up and down the country.
In this long-running dispute, I'm talking about the railways, I'm talking about the schools, I'm talking about the hospitals, is there something that you think, in retrospect, the government should have done differently?
Well, look, I think the government's having to deal with two very difficult things here. What we're trying
I'm
to
not
do...
asking about what you have to deal with. What should you have done differently? Like, looking back and being honest, what should the government have done differently?
Well, I think if you look at the fact that, take the NHS, which you were talking about, if you take the fact that actually the biggest trade unions and their members have accepted the
So you haven't done anything wrong at all in the last,
No, I'm not saying that.
months a year.
I'm saying
nothing wrong.
If you look at the overall...
It's crazy how he's trying to say that. I just want to cover up. I just wanted to triple check exactly what it was before I made a comment. But it's amazing that he says, well, actually, the Rail Delivery Group offer is very similar to the National Rail offer. It's in no way similar. This one's a 5% pay rise, and the National Rail one was 14%. They're still going off of the original first discussions that were had about the final offer from last year. Not the new offer that was won against National Rail earlier this year that was accepted by the RMT. He's such a liar, lying little shit.
Look, we can all go back and look at individual things, but if you look at the overall...
Go on, then, that's what I'm asking you to do.
If you look at the overall position, we've made fair and reasonable pay offers. They've been accepted now by some of the biggest NHS unions, and Network Rail staff have settled.
So you can't name a single thing the government's done wrong? I mean, don't you think that's part of the problem? Right?
No, but I don't...
It's not very humble, is it? When you're like, these are people who are like on low-paid jobs, many of them, working really hard, and you can't say a single thing the government's done wrong.
Well, I don't think it's very helpful to just go back over the history and think, what could we have done differently? I'm focused on what we're doing going forward. I think, and by the way, on train drivers, they're actually pretty well paid, actually. The average salary of a train driver is £60,000 a year.
I said many of the people who are going on strike, and I'm talking about nurses, I'm talking about ambulance drivers,
but of the ones
the ones
I'm responsible for, train drivers get £60,000 a year.
Sorry, I just want to clarify there that the one I was just looking at there, the Reuters article said 5%. That's just in the first year. There's also a second year of rise of 4% here. So he says 9% over 2 years and no compulsory redundancies. So it's still 5% in pay, behind where the National Rail dispute settlement was made earlier on this year. Sorry. I just want to clarify in case anyone comes in the comments saying, you're lying about the Rail Delivery Group pay offer. I have clarified my statement, okay?
It's very easy to pick like the one group who you feel like...
The pay deal they've been offered would take their average salary to nearly £65,000, and they won't even put that pay offer to their members. And so my
even 9% is below inflation. The highest headline level of inflation that we have had over the past 18 months was around about 13.5%, if I remember correctly. Where I work, all of our contracts, all of our direct debit payments for our customers, they've all gone up by 13.5%, I think it was. That's what the RPI was announced as it was in February, if I remember correctly. So that is even the 9% pay rise is still 5 points almost below inflation. So it's still a crappy pay rise. It's the only thing that's actually inflation busting was the 14% from National Rail.
What's the average salary of nurses then? It's not 60,000 a year, is
No,
it?
no, it isn't, and I wasn't pretending it was. But we've made a fair and reasonable pay offer to NHS staff, which has been accepted by the largest health unions, the members of the largest health unions. And as I said, the Secretary of State will get their formal feedback on Tuesday.
Of course, there's been a lot of scrutiny about the BBC chairman who stood down this week, who resigned. Should that appointment now be taken out of government hands?
The BBC, of course, is a publicly accountable institution funded through the licence fee, effectively by taxpayers. And that's why there's been a long-standing arrangement, you know, for the BBC chair to be appointed by the government. That's been true under parties of governments of both political parties. That's a long-standing arrangement, and we don't have any plans.
And it's been proven now that we cannot trust, to be fair, either party to do this in any kind of impartial manner, right? Whether or not, because of the political ties these people have previously had that are above board, that do show the conflict of interest that then gets brought up in the meetings regarding the appointment, right? The issue with Richard Sharp is that he did not bring up the conflict of interest in the first place. Not that the conflict of interest itself existed. It's the fact that the conflict of interest was not declared, which led him to be in the position of having to resign, because that wasn't taken into account during the appointment process. But he almost certainly would have got the job even if he had announced that he'd have this conflict of interest, showing that it's clearly a system that's not fit for purpose. And, you know, Mark Harper is right in saying that Labour have used this to their advantage as well. An ex-Labour councillor was appointed into this position under the last Labour administration, which just shows that maybe having the plans for some kind of, you know, independent reform, democratic reform within the BBC appointments process is actually really what we needed. Rather than saying the system's fine, it was just a momentary blip. And it's almost like there might have been a previous Labour leader who suggested democratising parts of the BBC to make it more representative and more independent. But of course, that is anti-Semitic to do that. So unfortunately, we're not allowed. Sorry. Just the way it goes.
To change it.
I guess the problem is that some think that this whole scandal came about because the government, under Boris Johnson, was trying to get their allies into this job, right? So wouldn't the best thing to do just to take all government involvement out of the process going forward?
Well, the BBC is funded effectively by taxpayers, not through taxes, but through the licence fee. So I think it's important that the government is involved in making the appointment. And Rishi Sunak will clearly continue to implement the rules that are long-standing. So we've got no plans to change them. And I said those are the rules that have been implemented by governments of both parties. And I think they've worked well over...
It's almost like both the party that's currently in government and the party that is almost certainly going to be in government after the next election are both full of establishment career politicians who want to be able to use all of the institutions of our countries as nepotism projects to be able to insert their mates into. And the Conservative Party know that they don't want to have to deal with properly scrutinising these things to be able to hamstring the next appointment. First of all, because it's been appointed by Rishi Sunak. So it's going to be ages, it's going to be until 2027 until Sir Keith can appoint one of his own, unless of course, by some weird situation means that Keir either loses the election or B has to stand down before 2027. Doesn't get the appointment, but also B because he knows that at that point everyone will have forgotten the Richard Sharp scandal, and Sir Keith can appoint one of his own little cronies to the position, whilst maintaining the political class's hegemony over our political institutions. It's as simple as that. I mean, to be fair, if we're going to have political appointments to places like the BBC, rather than being appointed for political reasons, for who they're allied with, who they're mates with, for example, to be able to work through different favours for high-paying jobs elsewhere by ensuring that your cronies get appointed to these high positions. How about we use the political nous that we can get from these appointments to trigger the rightoids, right? Having Gary Lineker as BBC chair would be the most triggering thing for the Conservatives. And if you're not going to use your political power to make your opponents upset for no reason, then what is political power for, right? Come on, you know it makes sense.
And just finally, there's lots in the papers about the coronation next weekend. People watching on TV are going to be asked to pledge allegiance to King Charles as well. I don't know where you're going to be on the coronation. Are you going to be pledging allegiance?
Yes, well, of course, members of Parliament pledge allegiance to His Majesty as part of swearing of oath of office. So I've already pledged allegiance to the King. Very happy to do so again. And
I pledge allegiance to the flag of Mr. Schneebly and will not fight him for creative control.
People do. I think, look, coronation is going to be a fantastic opportunity, not just to focus on our history and our constitutional matters, but also it's a great showcase for Britain around the world. We're going to have hundreds of foreign dignitaries coming here, and it's a great opportunity, I think, for Britain to demonstrate all about our country that's great, our fantastic values, and we can all get behind and support His Majesty the King.
Okay, thank
I
you.
mean, just because it's a British value doesn't make it good. I don't. Again, he's not got no utilitarian justification for the monarchy or pledging allegiance to such a thing. As loyal subjects that we are bound to do, of course. He just says, it's good and British, and I will wear the flag, and it will totally cover up for the fact that this country's in the fucking shit. Which basically sums up the entirety of this government, quite frankly. And also, if you're enjoying the comment, please do like, comment, and subscribe. That helps boost my shit in the algorithm, if you'd like to. No, you're not. It's a free country, obviously, but if you'd like to use my content, you can do those things. If you'd like to contribute financially, we can become a YouTube member for just 99p, cheaper than a can of Red Stripe. Or you can subscribe on Twitch for $3.99, or for free if you link your Amazon Prime account to your Twitch account to subscribe with Twitch Prime. Get one of those free each month. Or you can use Bits messages, which are text to speech, or you can also donate. Link is in the description.